Hello, hello, ahoy, hoy, and welcome to another episode of Off the Mark. I'm your host, Miss Tootie O, and with me is my beautiful co-host, Miss Meeks Kali. How are you, my dear? I have missed you so much.
I missed you. It feels like it's been an age, my love.
It's been,
Yeah,
it's been
how was
a
your
while.
trip? I'm so excited to have you back home.
The trip was amazing. I'm still really in the emotions from all of it. I've been on cloud nine and also the darkest cloud ever because the children.
Cascade of emotion.
Rein in yourself, woman. Yeah, so but it was beautiful. It was a beautiful trip overall. I had the best time ever, and thank you for asking. We're gonna try to make this episode a 15-minute. It may not work because, as I said, we've missed each other. I've missed your scent. I've missed your musk. But
When this is over.
If you guys have been following the Insta and the YouTube, I mentioned that we were gonna do an episode on the Hotel Cecil, only because it's a fascinating story for one. It's also it really dives into how we do our own type of research and how we have to take things and throw things away and the difference between coincidences and synchronicities and whatnot. So it's kind of cool the way the documentary took itself. The way it presented itself, especially particularly the third episode, which was called Down the Rabbit Hole,
Yep.
which is something that me and Miss Kali do quite often. We love to go down the rabbit hole, and we have not returned yet. It's been fun.
The only way out is through.
So if you haven't seen the documentary, I recommend it before watching this. If you have seen the documentary, which I imagine most of you have, it's about a 21-year-old female who mysteriously disappeared and passed away and was found at the bottom of the water tank at the Hotel Cecil. Her name was Elisa Lamb. She was a student from Boston University, I think.
British Columbia, I think.
She's from British Columbia. Yeah, she's from the Canadian. But I do believe she went to Boston University. Why I don't remember why she came to LA, but I assume it was just a visit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, she ends up mysteriously at floating in the water tank of the hotel. They found her several days later after reports of the water being tainted and or discolored that was coming out of the faucets of the hotel, which is how she was discovered. The whole story is just a little bit tragic. The mysteries in the elevators, the coincidences between her and this movie called Dark Water with Jennifer Connelly. So yeah, it was pretty interesting to see. I'm eager to see to get your perspective on it because I mean, like I said, we've done this for years and years and years. What this documentary actually has structurally pointed out. This is how we have gone into doing research on this and that and the other thing. So I just want to see like where you're at on it.
Yeah, it was interesting. I'm so glad that you recommended it because it wasn't something that usually would like take my radar to watch. But so like the first two episodes are just kind of like covering the case, but then the third one, Down the Rabbit Hole, is explicitly covering conspiracies about the incident and kind of all the different takes. It shows clips and investigations from a lot of different YouTubers and their findings on it and the synchronicities and how things tie together. So it's interesting that's portrayed that way because obviously conspiracy theorists have been such like a key player in the plot line of 2020 and 2021. They've been really demonized of like, how dare you? That's not what we think. But they, are addressing it in this like very popularized Netflix show that's gotten a lot of acclaim. It's even was released, I believe, on the anniversary of her death. Celebrate. But
that I didn't know. That's creepy.
Yeah. Well, it like just came out in February, I think, and she was found on February 19th. So, but it was interesting because they're portraying it of following all these different, amateur sleuths, basically investigating the different aspects of the incident. They read reports. A lot of them stayed at the Cecil Hotel and tried to go to her room and the room that she stayed in and walk the hotel and kind of figure out how feasibly possible it was for her to experience that or get to the rooftop. There was a lot of speculation of how she could have ended up in the water. So she was missing for several days before they actually found her. And then again, like Tootie said, that it was the discolored water that triggered them. So the interesting thing about the case that right off the bat tips it off that there was some type of foul play was that she was naked in the water tank on top of it. The last footage of her was when she was in the elevator, and she's very like curiously like poking out and frantically pressing buttons and stuff. So it seems as if there's someone in the general vicinity of her, as if she's trying to get away. A lot of people speculate maybe she was like on some type of drug trip or something. And just because she didn't have a history of that from people who knew her before, you know, in LA, like who knows who she met and potentially was experimenting with. But the interesting thing was that her clothes were off. So that alone would cause you to suspect that there was someone else involved. But ultimately, it's an unsolved case, that there's nobody that's been like convicted of her murder. So it's amazing that all these YouTubers are trying to find justice for her and to bring it to an end. But I don't know, there's also a lot of interesting plays on just this even being brought to the forefront of our awareness right now as a culture. And the whole time I was watching it, it really reminded me of American Horror Story with the Hotel Cortez and how it had a history of people dying there. I don't know if that's what even the Hotel Cortez was based on, was Cecil.
I'm going to imagine, yes, my goodness.
I'm
so happy we're talking about this because I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then it had like that whole like old vibe and stuff like that. So there's a lot of like intertwinement and predictive programming and stuff like that. And then SNL did a skit where it took place at the Cecil Hotel. So they're really like pointing to it in an interesting way. But then in the episode, like we said, as they bring up each synchronicity, they kind of downplay it as like, well, this could be this or that. Like she was found naked in the water tank, but then like, well, we did a forensics and there was no like biomatter from another person or under her fingernails or in her orifices or things like that that would suggest that she was assaulted in that way. So they bring up these very bizarre circumstances around her death, but then immediately dismiss it of like, but that's not it.
Right.
So, and that's kind of what we encounter frequently in this like conspiracy theory search of, you know, like we ourselves don't identify as conspiracy theorists, obviously, because I mean, there is a conspiracy. It's just like the theories of conspiracy just means that there's a group of people that are conspiring or working together for an ultimate mean. There's tons of conspiracies, like we're conspiring right now to make this podcast, you know, like the theory of it is just like how and in what way and which people, I guess. And all of that is kind of irrelevant to some extent because just the fact that the conspiracy happened, like a woman was dead in a water tank and that's suspicious, and why and what circumstances allowed and enabled for that to not only happen, but for her assaulter or whoever was involved in that to be brought to justice. So
right. And as far as conspiracies go, like the most direct and factual conspiracy you can consider, if you ask me, is the fact that the only thing that they were trying to hide and conspire towards is that they weren't trying to admit that maybe the roof door was unlocked and the alarm doesn't work. And that's how she got access, because they kept insisting that she got access through the fire escape. I don't know anybody in heck who's going to try to go up a fire escape 15 stories high. Maybe she did. I'm not saying she didn't, but they really tried to push that aspect of it as opposed to like, maybe she could have gone through the door. No, there's no way, because the door has an alarm and it's always locked and only certain people have keys. Right. And if you ask me, that's all legal. That's all just so that they don't have to be liable for somebody's death, if you ask me.
Right.
You know, so I mean, if you, that alone is them conspiring to save their own asses. So conspiracies, as Miss Kelly said, conspiracies do exist. They are real. Whether there's theories behind them or not is kind of irrelevant, because you can say that about anything. You can say about a science, the Bible. I mean, there's so many things you can theorize about. So let's toss that word out of the way and just remember that conspiracies are just a way of saying that people have planned and or make plans to do things for a certain result. That's what it is in general. So it's just kind of it kind of puts a thumb over your head when you sit there and you try to study things like this, because it's been taken to such a dirty or taboo phrase, conspiracy theory, or
Right.
you know, it's so it kind of. But what do you think the motive is behind a documentary like this? Are they shining a light on people who consider themselves researchers and or conspiracy theorists and or internet warriors? Or are they trying to, again, ridicule people who study things outside of the mainstream media?
The thing that it reminds me of, well, there's two things that come to mind right now, is like there's a bit where Dave Chappelle, I forget if it was an interview or one of his stand-up routines, where he says, never call somebody crazy, because crazy just means that like you don't understand things like they do, and it's the most dismissive thing that you could possibly say to somebody. And it's so like the conspiracy theorist is the same thing. It's just this key word that you can use to degrade or dismiss somebody, immediately take them off of their like standing in humanity and of like sound mind and body, that you remove them from that immediately by calling them a conspiracy theorist, that suddenly in the society or the circle that you're in, or at least in your view of them, that like whatever they say is less valid, or
Right.
you know,
Now they can't be taken seriously, and
now they can't be taken
their word.
seriously.
Right.
You know, so now everything after this that they say is colorable by law or whatever, you know, like if you were in the court in that sense. So when we're acting in the public sense, we have to be mindful to that same degree how that you can't slander somebody like that. Like that's a big deal, to question somebody's like critical thinking ability, especially when there is so much propaganda and things that, you know, prevalent in our culture. So another thing that comes to mind though is kind of how Hollywood tries to reflect the climate of the world at the time. So kind of another instance that comes to mind is there was like a Jennifer Lopez movie where they had a home birth scene, because like home births were like the business of being born documentary had just come out, and there was a big surge in home births at the time. And that was around the time that I had my child. And so I remember in the movie they had a scene where Jennifer, I forget what movie it is, but she's pregnant, and then she attends the birth of one of the people in her mom group, and it was a home birth, and they make it like it's a funny scene. It's like very fantastic, and they're like playing drums, and like she's screaming and has no like medical assistance, it seems, and just having the most like painful, awful, crazy birth is how it's portrayed. So they're like addressing that presence in the culture by featuring it in the movie, but then at the same time dismissing it as like, aren't these people wild? Like, check out these wackadoodles, you know? So that's kind of how even the editing was in this episode of Down the Rabbit Hole, that it would show these YouTubers being like, is it a ghost? Or like they'd say like, what could that be? And they'd, you know, make a valid conclusion based on the sequence of evidence that they just stated in their sentence, but then like their conclusion of that would be immediately dismissed by the next like cutscene that they did, of like, oh, now let's hear the detective of how that's irrelevant, that she couldn't have possibly, you know, gone through the door. Or like the hotel security personnel, she's like, the hotel personnel person said that when you open the door without a key, that would have tripped an alarm, and that they had to use a special key to turn off the alarm and stuff like that. So she's like, what, you think we're just going to leave the alarm to keep ringing? It's like, well, who was there that night? Does anybody else remember hearing the alarm or not? Or like, does that mean that the door wasn't tripped, or does that mean the alarm didn't work? Like, so they're playing into conclusion. They're like letting a question be presented and then playing in, like shifting it into conclusions before it like can spread to uninhibited.
Right, exactly. Before it can be given any further thought.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how it was edited. And another thing about the manager, she's either the greatest actress in the world, or she has no connection to emotion whatsoever.
Right.
She was a blank slate. She stonewalled the entire time.
Completely unbothered.
She creeped me out. She was exactly. She just seemed so well hinged.
I mean, on one hand, like that wasn't their first murder, so.
Exactly. Richard, the Night Stalker, stayed there, I think. Richard Marriott for some time. So
and they're near Skid Row, so apparently that was like, and a lot of Johns and prostitutes visited there, you know. So apparently that was an aspect, and law suicides as well. So apparently that wasn't. But still, how could you continue working in a place where you know that there's so much? I mean, it's a living. I don't know.
No, for real. Was that the Flintstones? No, for real though. I agree, but it just seemed, you would think that she'd have just a little bit of like it was really sad. Just a
Right,
tiny
like,
thing.
just another tragedy, man, like, like something.
Because, you know, I mean, especially because the way this one was, she's not a prostitute. She didn't OD on anything. You
Right,
know,
right.
this person lost her life. She walked into a hotel full of hope, thinking she was going to visit a city, a little girl, as she was, and you know that alone should be something. I mean, even I feel like I'm emoting more than she was,
Right.
and I didn't experience it at all. You know,
Right.
so it was just strange to see her the way she reacted to it. Let's talk about their first major connection or synchronicity thing. The Dark Water movie,
Okay.
which is a Japanese film turned American.
Mhm.
With it stars Jennifer. I just know it stars Jennifer Connelly in it, but it's basically the same plot, same thing. Only it's her daughter, and her daughter's also wearing a red coat.
Right.
Somehow ends up in the water tank of the hotel, and the water, the faucet in the water in the faucet is black, just like they discovered in the hotel, which is how they discovered Miss Elisa Lamb. So it's just weird. But what do you think? Is this a predicted programming type thing? Is this or is it just straight up honest coincidence? Or as someone else said, is it a copycat murder type thing?
That was interesting. Yeah, I love that they portrayed all those different potentialities. And I have, like, we've discussed predictive programming on the cast before, of how it is really prevalent. If you look back on past, you know, cinema and TV shows and whatever's in the media, that there's a lot of allusions to what ends up taking place in the future. 9/11 was one where there's tons of movies and things like that where things hit the Twin Towers, or there's been a lot of, even for the virus, that there's a lot of, you know, movies about that and spread that resembles it. So there definitely is that potential, but it's interesting because it seems like such a one-off case. Like how significant then is Lisa Lam that they would need to have a predictive programming moment from that? So what was the repercussions of that event that they were kind of stimulating, or like creating space or energy for potentially? Who knows? You know, like I guess part of it is the conspiracy theory, like runaway train of it, to just kind of like get people. It kind of also reminded me of the Q maps and Q drops and everything like that, of like this wild goose chase kind of what else was going on at the time of her death, that story needed to be headlined. Like, what weren't we paying attention to when she was initially found missing and found, you know?
Interesting.
And the months like following that. So I don't know that part. I'd have to like look back, but that'd be interesting to think about. But in addition to that, it's interesting that, like, obviously it's tragic. She died and there was a mystery. So that makes sense that there would be more publicity around it and stuff like that. But also, like, women go missing all the time. Women are trafficked and, you know, murdered all the time. Not everyone gets their name and face put to it, though, you know? So it's interesting of like, why her, though? You know, and they even admitted that the Cecil Hotel got a lot of publicity from it. And all of a sudden, right after her death was announced, that it was, or even that she was missing, that they became like obsessed with it, and that they were like booked up, and that it had continued like that up until I think 2017 was when they closed finally for renovations. And I don't know if there was another murder right at that time, or like, because they were still open for some period after her death. So that wasn't explicitly what made them close, but supposedly they were closed for renovations, and then they're reopening this year. Yay, get excited. You know, so
yeah, no kidding. They're reopening. I think they changed the name to Stay on Main. Yeah.
Part,
Yeah,
wow.
so they have the hotel broken up now into two sections where half is residential. I guess the Hotel Cecil side is residential, and the Stay on Main side is the hostel. Yeah, like you said, get excited, you know.
Publicity.
Here. Yeah. So I think what you said a little earlier was pretty interesting, when you said what was happening around the same time that brought attention to this to her story in particular. What happened afterward, though, is interesting to me, because I didn't think about it till now. But if we're gonna go down this hole, and we're gonna go this route, I think they're all connected. I think Dark Water was definitely a predictive programming thing, and I think the next part of the conspiracy is that the tuberculosis outbreak that happened right after they discovered her body.
Right.
Um,
Like immediately after.
like immediately after, exactly. So it's interesting to note that I'm going to say it was Boston University that she was attending and studying, and actually in studies for tuberculosis research, which, you know, again, coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, so there's that. On another thing is that if the tuberculosis vaccine, if you look it up, it was called, at the time, was called LAMELISA, which is her name backwards, spelled exactly the same.
Yeah, just like first name, last name,
just straight up.
switched. And that, I forget if that was the test or the vaccine for it, but yeah, what are the odds that right after she's like almost sacrificed to the tuberculosis like being spread, and that name was already established for the test like prior to her death? Like they're seemingly unrelated, but they like coincide in such a way. And another coincidence that they allude to or note in the documentary is that she visited a bookstore called The Last Bookstore. That was her last bookstore that she went to.
I'm so happy you brought that up too.
But that if you look up the address of the bookstore, that it has a zip code that's actually, even though it's located in Los Angeles, the bookstore, that when you look up the address, that the zip code was located in British Columbia, where she was buried.
Yeah.
So, and I believe she went to the University of British Columbia, but I might be mistaken. I forget. I didn't see the whole.
I don't know why. I don't know why I'm thinking Boston. I don't know.
Boston. But yeah, and then but another thing that has been intriguing me is that I've been watching another YouTube channel called Decoding Your Reality, and there he dives really deep into like different events and bands and movies and things like that. But he ties in a lot of the different systems of coding that we have in existence. Like God is a mathematician and a scientist, and there's all these different programs that we are set. So it is essentially a woven web of matrices that we're operating under. So he ties in gematria, like we've talked about before, of the numerical values of letters and how that spells out, you know, different phrases and is language all its own. He brings into account the periodic table and the alchemical properties, and those have certain sigils and symbols. And the periodic table, like iron, for instance, like, yeah, it's iron, but it also has its metaphysical, esoteric properties as well, in terms of like the alchemical mastery and processes that has been, you know, the great work and age-old practice of our you know, world and society. So that a lot of these secret societies and schools supposedly are in the practice of. He also ties in a lot of like the tarot cards and cardomancy and things like that are just so, there's so many coincidences that it goes to the point beyond predictive programming, to the point where like no human could have plotted it that well. Like he shows how in a certain movie, not only did like the release date have a certain like numerology to it, but also the actors and their birth dates relate to a certain card that represents a different periodic, which ties back into the movie. And that it's just like so many like facets that all correlate to this. And it really points to that basically like the Matrix movie, that there is an architect or some type of like creature or society of creatures, be it God or fallen angels or whatever, it, you know, Saturn, which they're in the black cube, which they're always worshiping here. Something has some type of confines and programming, and it's possible, especially in his conclusion of it from his findings on the Decoding Your Reality channel, that we basically are born into this world, you know, like astrology, all these things counterplay that we're born into this world with a certain program that like the time and space, like coordinates of ourselves, launch us off into like a life path. And the more that we can figure out our code and know ourselves, the more that we can steer our free will in it, kind of like a bowling ball, but that the less conscientious we are of it, that there's like a spectrum of probability, possibility for that life path, and that we kind of just ping pong through it if we're not like actively engaging and trying to steer, but there's still like a parameter for what we can accomplish. And that really does like sound similar to Christianity, of how there's like we're like born, and like God always already knows God's children, and like we're already written in the book, but then there's free will, but then we sinned and messed up, but then, you know, so like all that kind of stuff that doesn't that is contradicts itself or something like that, or is kind of puzzling, kind of plays out and makes sense in this. If you think of like astrology and numbers and periodic table and chemistry and all these things kind of correlating into like this being of you, this spark of like, that's the, you know, concentration of all that. So part of it is that the dark water, that it wasn't necessarily somebody is so brilliant that they're like 10 years from now or whatever the like duration was, there's going to be this 21-year-old girl. She's going to be 21 by then. She's like 13 or, you know, whatever now, but then she's going to be 21. She's going to watch something that's going to inspire her to go to LA, and she's going to specifically stay at the Cecil Hotel, because I know I'm going to like plot into the machine to make sure that she buys her plane ticket and like this, you know, books this hotel and whatever, and like visits this place. Like the coincidences are so vast that it's beyond what like a human mind could feasibly coordinate.
Right.
So is there like some type of supercomputer even that like we're in some type of like, did like Elon Musk has alluded to that too a lot of times, I think, that we're already in some type of digital reality. And it's interesting. We've had a lot of conversations recently too of how our phones have been like interacting with our, or reflecting our train of thoughts and stuff, like not just only our text messages and things that it could feasibly hear or see, but just like what we think about, and then like an ad will pop up. So I know I'm diverging everywhere, but there's a lot of speculation back in December when we had the Great Conjunction that there was going to be like a phasing into two dimensions basically, and one was going to be, the fifth dimension was going to be a different like energetic reality, and then there was going to be the denser like third dimension that we've thus far mainly been operating on, and that Earth would basically be kind of like substituted with a digital version of it to like catch the consciousness that wasn't like projected into, I don't know, like if you follow the things, then it like, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, but there was a lot of videos on the Great Conjunction back then.
Watch other episodes to understand this a little bit better. But you know, but I don't disagree. You know, it was, you know, I don't disagree at all with anything that you're saying. I do. I mean, in fact, like if you really think about it, and it's not that crazy to understand that, like she was just mentioning the Great Conjunction. I want to say the Great Conjunction and the Mandela effect are also connected. I want to say creation and evolution are also connected. You can't have one without the other. There's always a yin, and there's always a yang, and that's something that's being taught in all religions in one way or another, in all aspects of science in one way or another, in math. You know, once we understand that everything is connected in one way or another, it's easier to understand how we can connect dark water to Elisa Lam's passing, and parts of some cue drops to things that happen in history and or things that are going to happen in the future and things that have happened in 2020. So it's not that we're pulling and trying to make these connections and trying to convince other people that this is exactly how it is and this is why it is this way. It's really more just taking a step back and being on the outside looking in and understanding exactly, not even exactly, because it's as you said, our human minds cannot comprehend things exactly. The fact that I'm still not convinced that time and space don't exist. like no man, it's like 9:30. Like no, you know. So I'm still not convinced. You know, like I said, it's just something that's so uncomprehendable. But at the same time, when your body and your mind and your soul are connected to each other, it's easier for you to read your own instincts and your own guts and be able to understand what may be taken as truth and what is absolutely BS. And you sound like a crazy person now, so look at it. You know, so there is both. There is always the take it with a grain of salt. We don't, at this point, there is no choice. We've already known that we've been lied to in history. We're being lied to today. And these are things, as Ms. Kelly said, where we're either going to be, we're going to take our own will, or we're going to ping pong through and just exist, you know, and yeah. So, I mean,
another thing that that you just made me think of is like that cone of if like of a traveler in the woods and they're coming across a path where there's going to be two twins and one twin always tells the truth and one twin always tells a lie, and they can only ask them one question. And so the answer of it is to ask either twin, what would your sibling say, which way would your sibling tell me to go, and then go the opposite way. So it's more about having that centering in ourself and our like wherewithal and awareness in ourselves, so that when we're confronted with, you can't entirely know what's true or false outside of us. All we can know are like the rules of truth, kind of like how truth plays out. So even in this Elisa Lam thing, like I don't know how much that Netflix documentary was, designed and fabricated just to be sensational. Like I don't even know if she really did go to that college, or I don't know her story. So even as we're searching through these conspiracies, like even as we're searching past history that sees like, oh, this historical event justifies my theory for now, like that historical event could have been fabricated, who knows. So but they still have relevance in how they're tying into each other. So like the most significant things is that everything's interconnected, and that you can't even ask the sibling for the answer on the other one, so that there is this kind of like duality and play with the world that we're engaging in, where as long as we can figure out how to position ourselves, we can navigate like this gravity and levity that we're spiraling through.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Absolutely. So to wrap this up, what do you think happened?
Okay. No, you go first.
If she mentions dolphins, I swear to God.
Hear me out.
Okay. So if I go first, I honestly do. My gut tells me that I don't think that little girl personally brought tuberculosis into the works by any means. But I do believe that her significance and her and the way it was portrayed on the news was definitely put out there to either one, hide something, or to introduce something else. So her death was not an accident. She was taken out on purpose. I want to look into that manager. I don't even think she's a manager of the hotel, to be honest. I think she's CIA or FBI. She's way too blank. Yeah, I do believe that she was taken out on purpose, taken out in that disgusting way for God knows what reason, discovered on purpose in that way because, as you said, they were either hiding something and or introducing something else. And maybe it was TB, maybe it was because the word epidemic has been passed along. Remember the Ebola thing a few years ago, swine flu. So we've been introduced to the idea of this, what's happening now with COVID, throughout several years. And I do believe that maybe this TB thing was an introduction. People were theorizing that it was to try to take out and minimize the homeless population. I don't think it was that at all. I think it was exactly them trying to introduce the idea that epidemics and pandemics are on the rise.
Yeah, that you can catch something from your fellow man, even if they're seemingly harmless.
Right. And speaking of the gematria, I would love for you to look up LAM or Lam Elisa and see what comes up with that, because for that to be so prominently it's just, come on. I don't understand how that's a coincidence. That one I can't understand being a coincidence. She passes away, tuberculosis outbreak, vaccine is called Lam Elisa. That one I don't understand as a coincidence, but yeah.
Oh, that's weird. I had taken screenshots earlier, but it's not on my phone. Okay. Should we pull it up and just look real quick?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. I'm down.
Okay. So here, let me go to the
so
page.
As she explained, the gematria is just she explained it way better than I'm about to, but numbers and letters basically coincide with each other, and they have power in certain phrases that they release. Again, she explained it way better than I just did, but
and there's different systems. No, that was exactly it. That there's and there's different systems of gematria. So there's like a standard English version. There's the more traditional Hebrew or Jewish version. There's Latin. There's simple kind. There's Chaldean, which I think is like one of the most accurate that they don't have on this radar specifically. Okay, so let's look up Lisa Lam, and basically you can just type in gematria calculator into your search and then enter any phrase or word or sequence of numbers and calculate it. And then at the top, it'll give you the numerology. So in Jewish gematria, E equals 5, L equals 20, but in English gematria, they have a different system of the letters, so E equals 30. And then, yeah, so it starts with the Jewish gematria on top. Okay, I did look at it. I wonder why I didn't do screenshots. But yeah, it was interesting because it had like finding God, it had abracadabra. There weren't particular words.
Klingon, cool. Dark and black.
Dark and black, yeah.
That's interesting. Natalie, I want to look up Natalie. I wonder if that's the manager's name. I'm just saying.
Oh, the other thing that struck me was Bitcoin and money.
Oh, interesting.
And that that was right around the time that they were
being introduced,
navigating all that, yeah. And remaking the rules for that. But yeah, she is something that's in the search.
I'm alive.
Let's try Mom Lisa for the tetanus thing. So oh, I suppose it adds up to the same because it's the same letters. But the other thing we looked at was the JK's. Okay. So
God is a code. Holy crap.
Yeah, and like Masonic.
Holy crap. God is the architect.
It had thinking, I think, on both of them.
Oh, wow. Digital Angel episode. Decode the end.
Oh, Leviathan. That was the other thing that struck me about the black water part, is that it reminded me of that supernatural season.
What?
Huh?
I'm sorry, I'm just reading the other.
Sorry. It reminded me of that supernatural season where they had a whole thing of like there being like the Leviathan and there was like black water going through the pipes and stuff like that. And that's how they like the demons possessed people. It was like this,
I remember that
in the water.
Holy balls.
So it's interesting that they're saying specifically Leviathan in this whole thing. And you know, there's a lot of like words that are kind of overlapping, like my love sounds good. Yeshua sounds good, you know. So it's not to say that like sometimes you know, the devil and Jesus have the same gematria, so that's not necessarily to say that but there's something there's some type of like energetic numerological connection, kind of like how you can arrive at the number 9 by adding different like sequences of number that all add up to 9. So like the result, kind of the ending energy or what you have is the same kind of. But yeah, and we're still, you know, like looking more into that so that we can master more of this decoding. But yeah, I think mainly we wanted to discuss this topic to kind of just show how conspiracy theories like strike, and kind of how to like open your mind to pursue, you know, what the potentiality could be. A lot of those YouTubers, like amateur sleuths, obviously were going like very by the letter of the facts of the case. Like there were interesting things like the lid was closed on the water tank, and if she was floating at the water level, even she was alive at the time, she wouldn't have been able to like reach up and close the lid in after her. And there was no like pole or whatever in there that she could have used. And again, even if she was committing suicide, why would she take off her clothes first to be in there? Another thing was that the LAPD had searched for her initially, and they didn't take dogs. They went up to the roof, but they didn't take dogs near the water tank, so they would have found her if they were on the roof. So they speculated that somebody at LAPD, or they were you know, collaborating with the hotel to do some type of cover up. But there was definitely like a larger story and things that like they're dismissing it as, well, we can't prove anything, so she must have just suicide and ended up in there.
But the internet sleuths were adamant about getting the autopsy report, and they waited months, and it wasn't released until they started bitching and crying about it.
Right.
Yeah, so they didn't release it. I think they said 3 to 4 months later is when it was.
And even with the autopsy, by then they had they said like the first thing that you look for in any murder case, of course, is the time of death, because that like branches off to everything else. And so they couldn't get an official time of death because it'd been so many days since her disappearance, and the decomposition of her body could have changed depending on like how the heat and temperature of the water tank, you know, like change the temperature in the with the water and everything and inside of there. So they weren't able to get a like time of death. They weren't able to address foul play, even though she was naked in a closed container. But because there was no one else on the video with her, and because supposedly she went up they're like, she must have climbed out the window and gone up this like ladder to the 15th floor. She's, you know, the whole like what it would have had to do, the circumstance that would have to be for it to be like that straightforward is absurd and impossible. But then at the same time, like they're just, well, that's the best we got, you know, or that's the most that we can come up with. So so yeah, those clues were like going like very like evidence-based like that. And you can certainly look at those things when you are investigating a conspiracy. Like generally the best way to start is follow the money, like who stands to benefit from this happening. So obviously the hotel got a boost in business, a lot of publicity, you know, they're like haunted hotels, like, you know, they keep their audience, you know, rolling, and like that's an investment. It's part of your branding. So yeah, but to kind of follow these clues, see who stands to benefit from it, recognize that there's a lot of different parts at play. So there could be somebody that was conspiring at LAPD for a completely different reason than the people were covering up at the hotel, and maybe they weren't even like covering it up together. So there could be like a lot of independent factors that also just kind of coincide as well. There's a lot of potential to it, and it's not so much of like, it's beautiful that people want justice for Elisa, and of course we should rally for each other, especially in instances like this. But at the same time, the most important thing to take away, I think, from conspiracies is just how it does affect your daily life, and where that how that shifts your reality as a result. So if the main takeaway that you get from this is just that there is such a thing as numerology and different mathematics like potentially coinciding, or that synchronicities are a thing, because some people don't even necessarily believe in synchronicities, you know. So if the case just proves that for you as a new energy for you to interact with in your life, then that's what you take from it. But I guess like the main point of conspiracies is just to recognize the folly of displaced trust, or giving trust to something that doesn't have your best interest at heart from that.
Right. Well said. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's been a long road, like doing what we do, and being insulted and being laughed at, and again, I'm so when you brought up the Dave Chappelle interview where he says, you know, the easiest way to dismiss somebody is to call them crazy. Right. It happened around the time that he denied his $50 million deal, and he ended up in Africa, and everybody's like, Dave's gone nuts, Dave's gone crazy. And really he was crying for help. There was something in Hollywood that scared the shit out of him that he wanted nothing to do with it. Right. And really, that's the bottom line. And you want to call that a conspiracy theory? Fine. But that man has seen the devil, and that's why he ended up leaving. Why he's back now? He has different motives now.
He looks different now too, if you follow all that stuff.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
And he's very cooperative now.
Yep.
All of a sudden.
Let's do a Dave Chappelle episode.
I know, right?
But yeah, he was not wrong back then. And others have followed suit. Names that we can't name now because they're not in Hollywood anymore. But there's been many people in Hollywood who've seen the devil and decided to leave. Mm-hmm. There's reasons for it. Again, why Dave came back, there's motives behind that too. So, you know, let's do it. Well, we'll do it one day. But that was amazing. I'm telling you, I've been thinking about this episode for a while, because I love that we got to, I love that it was able to expose certain things. And like you said, you take from it what you can, even if it just opens your eyes to the idea that maybe things aren't always what they seem. Mm-hmm. Right. You know, yes. So that alone was enough for me to be like, cool, this documentary is great. But aside from that, again, you know, being aware of how dismissive it was of most of the heavy parts of the conspiracies. Mm-hmm. The tuberculosis one being the biggest one. Lam Elisa is not a coincidence. Sorry. Come on. So come on. Yeah, it was good stuff. So
it's like everyone's taking crazy pills.
Yeah, right. Good. Good. Red pill, black pill, call it. Yeah, so good stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, great, wonderful suggestion. I'm really excited we got to dive into this topic, and thank you everyone for your support and following us along on the cast and minding our break and catching up with us now. We're going to try and keep them shorter now. I know we missed each other and there was a lot to cover still in this cast, but we're going to try to be more targeted with our topics and be adding more to our Patreon as well for you there. So give us suggestions of anything that you'd like us to discuss. We love to have the conversation and hear your questions, or start the dialogue.
Yep. Patreon.com/offthemarkcast. We're also on Instagram, also on Twitter. I think that's it for right now. But
Facebook kind of.
Oh yeah, we're kind of on Facebook too.
Sometimes. When they let us, I don't know.
Either way, just excuse me, like, share, subscribe, do the thing. Yeah, I'm sorry that it wasn't 15 minutes, but it's not like you guys were expecting 15 minutes. Come on.
They didn't believe us.
We're trying. I promise you, we're trying. I've been your host, 2DO, Miss Meeks Kelly. Thank you so much again for all your hard work. Stay vigilant, stay focused, keep the peace, and if you haven't seen the documentary, at least watch episode 3. That's probably it's probably the most interesting one out of all of them. But yeah, do what you gotta do, and yeah, we love you guys. Thanks for
love you guys. Join us next time for further depths down the rabbit hole.